In this tutorial, I wanted to walk you through some of the very basic but yet very essential components of Adobe Photoshop, things that are really important to know when it comes to using the software. And this is a reminder for those who have used the program before and also new information from those who haven't before. If you haven't used this before, this is a very similar to a traditional image editing program. You have the different toolbar over here for the different things that you can do in the program. You have modifications to whatever tool that you have selected. Over here, this is a pane that's going to become much more important as we move through Photoshop, but it allows you to look at different additional menu layers. If you don't see anything over here, it's probably because one of these buttons is not selected, and you can open up that menu by clicking on these buttons down below. And then up here at the very top, these drop-down menus are going to be things that you're going to use to help enhance the project that you are going to be creating. So first of all, your keyboard shortcuts from what you've been using on other things in the past in general will work here very well. Things that are important like undo, copy, and paste are going to be essentials for using Photoshop. But let's say that you are going to be opening up an image that you have downloaded to your computer. Command O or clicking File Open will get you there. And I have it saved to my desktop, but you might have it in other different locations on your computer. But let's say this is the image that I wanted to go on and open up. High School Musical Junior. This might be the show that we're doing in the spring. Interesting. So when your image opens up, you're going to notice that you can do any of the functionalities over here on the left-hand side. This brush tool is essentially like a paintbrush. If you want to paint on here, it's so simple, just clicking and dragging. You might want to make some effort to change some of the aspects of the brush, like the size. It goes by pixels. The brush stroke type, you'll notice that there are some things that are different in case you want to have something that looks a little bit different. Lastly, opacity is essentially how much paint you are putting down when you draw. Think of it like the difference between a paintbrush that's covered in paint, and if you lower the opacity, it's more like spray paint where you're doing like a light dusting. It's how much you can see through behind. Okay, notice how I'm painting over. Now I clicked and dragged on this, and if I click and drag again, it adds another layer of paint to it. So you can, if you're trying to get something that masks over other colors much better, you can click multiple times and it will add more paint to it. By the way, I don't want any of these useless drawing on my picture, so I can press Command Z to undo multiple times. I'm pressing it rapidly and get rid of all of that annoying things. The eraser tool is very similar. The brush size, the type of brush, and you can lower the opacity. So instead of erasing, well, this is 100%, just paint goes right through stuff, down to something that's like 50%, where you just remove a little bit of the color. Okay. Now you're going to notice that the background that I'm erasing to looks like a checkerboard. That is because it wants to let you know that there is no background whatsoever. Okay? If you erase something and you get checkerboard behind it, it means no background. That's a distinct difference than this white area that's right here, because if I paint my house white, it does not mean that you can't see my house. It doesn't cease to exist. Okay? The eyedropper lets you pick a color. You notice that the color that's currently being painted is right over here. If I click on somewhere, it will let you copy the color that you see. You have to be very careful if you're trying to pick a color of something that has a lot of shading, like for example, a face. It's going to pick a pixel that you clicked on unless you kind of change the sample image size. So this is like, it kind of does, in general, the color that it sees in this amount of pixels, okay? So adding different text, if you click on the text tool, that's a fine time for the spinny color wheel. If you click on the text tool, it's going to bring up a text menu that you can use to type, and I will have more things about text in a later tutorial because they can get kind of complicated. And yeah, this is the basic draw functions that are right over here. A lot of these enhanced things we're going to do in another tutorial. They deal with brushing up on different things that already exist. And the selection tool can get quite complicated depending on how you're trying to select different things on your picture. But these are the basics when it comes to drawing and modifying the different things that you see on the canvas. You'll notice that the image that I opened, it popped up here like it's a tab. If I go and create a new file, it's going to pop up when we're done with creating it on its own new tab. So you notice that when I do click on a new file, I have the opportunity to change the size of this, specifically the amount of pixels that are in a square inch. 300 is very good, and this thing would make it so that it is 6 inches wide by 6 inches wide by 4 inches tall, or the size of a larger photograph. If you wanted to make this the size of a letter, for example, you might want to have this be 8.5 inches by 11 inches. And this will make it the size of a piece of paper. Hey, look at that. Now you'll notice that this actually looks smaller than this because this one is zoomed in a little bit. You can see how zoomed it in is by up here. It says 81.3%. So this one looks like it's actually zoomed out a little bit. If I change this to 100%, by the way, I can actually click on its size down here and change it to 100%. This would be how big this thing is exactly. If I was to try to print this at 100%, this is how big it would be. You'll notice right here on this document, you can see I can switch back and forth between the tabs. This one, you're viewing it at 16%, okay? This is what it would technically be at 100%. Now, wait a minute, Mr. Grant, I don't understand. This is not 16, or this is not the size of a piece of paper. This is crazy. This is absolutely insane. This is absolutely not the size of a piece of paper. I gotta tell you, you're correct. You are absolutely correct. This is not the size of a piece of paper. Part of this has to do with how many pixels there are per square inch. If I go back into new blank file, you're going to notice that I have a resolution of 300 pixels per inch. What I'll tell you about this is that the computer has a whole bunch of different pixels all across it, which is what you use to see. Well, it doesn't have that many pixels. If you're at 100%, then you're able to view 1 pixel per pixel spot on the computer, which unfortunately does not match up to an inch. Okay, so I might have something that's about this long. That's actually what they consider an inch in the computer. What I want to tell you about that is don't worry about that for now. Okay, don't worry about that for now. But when I created a new picture, you notice how the background is white, and if I try to erase it, it doesn't really do anything. I'm going to be talking about layers, which is a very complicated thing, in another tutorial. But for now, I want you to be able to play around opening up an image that you found, that you've downloaded on a computer, and do some basic modifications to it so that you have an understanding of how this software works. I want to make sure that when you guys are able to use Photoshop that you don't have some of the more basic questions of how do I erase something, okay? You should be able to do this by looking at the stuff on the screen and being able to modify the different things on the computer. You can, if you want to select, I dragged and dropped, but you'll notice that when I select something, there we go. You see how it does the little tiny dots around the outside so that you can see? This is really how you can tell that something is selected. Whee! Will we talk about this more in another tutorial? You bet you will, because selecting images is actually going to be a big part of what we do with our Photoshop project. But for now, enjoy.